This might be the most pointless video I ever make. I mean, really, everyone has played Mario. Somehow, in some way, you've played it. And in the 30 plus years it's been going, almost nothing has changed. And yet, despite that, we all seem to lose our minds when Nintendo announces the next big Mario title. And it's not hard to see why. Mario, unlike any other long-running series, always receives the highest quality treatment from Nintendo. And for the player, that treatment is always felt in the gameplay. I would go as far as to say there's never been a bad Mario game. Okay, bad mainline Mario game. But with a series this long, it can be hard to know where to start. So, for those of you who have never played a video game before, here's the Newcomer's graded guide to Super Mario. So, here's how it works. We score these games based on 4 criteria. 1, the quality of the game. 2, how well this game represents the franchise. 3, how well this game is aged. And 4, how available this game is for you to go buy it. And if you want more information on exactly how we break these scores down, well, you can watch this short video right here. Now, let's take a look at Super Mario Bros. We live in an era where games from the past are constantly being remade and remastered and remixed, and then re-released next generation at full price. But when you make a game right the first time, you don't have to do any of that. But you can if you want to, I don't know. True quality ages beautifully, and Nintendo has over 30 years of evidence to show that they don't need to go in and change anything in Super Mario Bros. Also, you see what Mario's doing here? And here? Remember them, because this is the foundation upon which every Mario game has been built. It starts with a simple premise, running and jumping, and then a game is built around it, and it's beautiful. Look at Super Mario Bros. 3. Same mechanics, only now you have more power-ups, a world map, and enemies that change how you interact with the world. And this continued into 3D Mario. Sure, it's a little more complicated, but not by much. You still run and jump, only now you can wall jump, backflip, long jump, dive jump, cyclone jump, side jump, and whatever the heck this is. But the fun comes from all the different situations the game throws at you. For such simple mechanics, Nintendo and even fans have managed to create incredible original ideas using the same blocks and tile sets. There is so much done with this simplicity that even after the 100th time, it's still fun to pick up and play. Super Mario Bros. Gets an 8 for game quality, a 10 for franchise value, an 8 for aging, and a 10 for availability, for an average score of 90%. Now, let's look at a 3D game. Super Mario 64. When it comes to Mario, we have 3 types. Type 1, 2D platformer Mario. Type 2, open world 3D Mario, where the worlds are fully explorable. And Type 3, closed world 3D Mario, where the worlds are totally linear. For Super Mario 64, we have the first Type 2 Mario game, with fully explorable worlds and collectible items in each world, thus creating the first Collectathon. And it was a good one, laying the groundwork for later titles like Banjo-Kazooie and Donkey Kong 64. And this could easily have gone badly, not just in terms of a bad transition to 3D, but even just a bad Collectathon. Thankfully, it was neither of those things, and gaming was again changed by Nintendo. To the point where when a new 3D Mario is announced, there is always someone asking for it to be more like 64, and it is hard not to see why. The pacing, the imagination, the atmosphere, the secrets hidden literally everywhere, all these elements made Mario 64 an immersive experience, one that was hard not to get lost in. And even now it's still fun to just pop it back in, run through Bob-omb Battlefield, and feel that satisfaction again. But, as much as I hate to say it, the game has not aged too well. It's not bad, not by any means, but it is a little bit clumsy, and it can be hard to keep up a solid pace on some of the more challenging platforms. But despite feeling more clunky, it's still my preferred 3D Mario. There is even a hack that came out recently that added a massive multiplayer mode to the game, so clearly, for some people, there's still something that keeps them coming back. So give it a go. You'll be glad you did. Super Mario 64 gets a 9 for quality, a 10 for franchise value, a 7 for aging, and an 8 for availability, for an overall score of 85%. Now, let's go back to the NES. Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels. Nowadays, we know a sequel is a way for a developer to expand upon the game they made and implement ideas they weren't able to do the first time around. Sadly, back in 1986, this wasn't really the standard, and because of it, The Lost Levels seems to have missed all the key points that made the original game fun to play. The level design was worse, the only new power-up hurts you, and there's literally a warp zone trap where you either go back to level 1 or die. Plus, visually and sonically, nothing was really updated, so it feels kind of effortless on Nintendo's part. Really, it plays more like a bad DLC than it does a sequel. I don't want to harp on this game too hard, and to be honest, I can't. It's literally a batch of subpar Super Mario Bros. Stages, and everything I said before pretty much applies here. Play it if you're up for something really challenging, but otherwise, you're not missing much. Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels gets a 6 for game quality, a 6 for franchise value, a 6 for aging, and a 10 for availability, for an overall score of 70%. Honestly, the American Super Mario Bros. 2 ended up being the better sequel overall. Speaking of which, Super Mario Bros. 2. So, while I'm sure a lot of you already know this technically is not a Mario game. This was actually a Japanese game called Doki Doki Panic and was reskinned for its American release as Super Mario Bros. 2. Apparently, Lost Levels was deemed too hard and too similar to Super Mario Bros. To warrant an American release. Hey, thanks for the save, Nintendo. And really, this was easily the better game. The level design, the gameplay, the visuals, everything was a step forward, even if it wasn't really a Mario game. And whether it be because we thought this game was Super Mario Bros. 2, or because the game was popular in Japan, characters like Shy Guy, Birdo, Ninja, and even Bomb have become mainstays in the Mario universe ever since. I mean, really, can you imagine Mario 64 without Bomb Battlefield? And that's not all. Luigi's high jump, Toad's speed, Peach's floating jump, all of these abilities are still present today, and they weren't even really their abilities. It's not an easy game, and any vertical level is going to be completely maddening, but there's a lot of original ideas here, and for an NES game, a lot of depth for a platformer. Super Mario Bros. 2 gets an 8 for quality, an 8 for franchise value, an 8 for aging, and a 10 for availability, for an overall score of 85%. Now, let's take a look at another 3D game. Super Mario Sunshine. Okay, so I gotta be real with you guys. I, just like you, have tons of fond memories of how great this game was as a kid. The game was oozing with style, and it really sold this tropical island feeling. It looked good too, but have you ever gone back and actually played it? Probably not, right? I mean, I'm sure some of you have, but for some reason, despite the age of remakes and re-releases we live in, Sunshine has actually never left the GameCube, and I'm kind of starting to see why. Despite my memories, and maybe it's just me, I found the game really clumsy and awkward and overall not as fun as I remembered it. In fact, more often than not, I encountered glitches, clumsy platforming, and oh god, this camera! There is a noticeably stark contrast between going back to Mario 64 and going back to Super Mario Sunshine. With 64, I can jump in, go to the first level, and go play, all within about a minute. But in Sunshine, starting it up takes way longer. You have to watch the opening cutscene, find the flood, do the tutorial, watch another cutscene, fight the same boss you just beat, chase Paint Mario, and then you can go to the first stage. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes a less steep learning curve is necessary to help ease players in, even if it can be a tad boring. And this makes sense to do with as big a mechanic change as the flood. However, the most egregious part of Sunshine is just how frustrating it can be. While moving forward usually isn't an issue, when it comes to more complex platforming, using FLUDD quickly becomes irritating. And even when the FLUDD is gone, the camera seems to gently pan and slowly throw off your directional movement, making what should be a simple run in one direction a broken mess. Sunshine is not a game for a newcomer, and honestly, it's aged really poorly, which is really sad considering how much it borrows from Mario 64. The star system, mission-based zones, Mario's health, it's all carried forward. But the most telling sign of Sunshine's aging is just how few of its original ideas were brought forward to other Mario games. In fact, aside from the FLUDD appearing in Smash and the Piantas becoming new Mario mainstays, very little else is done to nod to this game. And from an editor's perspective, I really wanted to go further in this game and get a lot more variety in my footage, but my god, this game is a chore just to get through now. It's not a bad game. I want to make that clear. It's not bad. But it's the lowest point that 3D Mario has ever reached. So while it can be fun, it is not a game for the faint of heart or those prone to chucking controllers like I was. Rest in peace, Wavebird. Sunshine gets a 6 for game quality, a 7 for franchise value, a 6 for aging, and a 6 for availability, for an overall score of 63%. Now let's get to the one you've been waiting for. Super Mario Bros. 3. Usually, I have a bit of an internal debate on which game is going to appeal to which person, but I can say with absolute confidence that if you want the truest Mario experience, if you want to get a feel for exactly what this series is about, and see why it has such longevity, then start here. Not only is Super Mario Bros. 3 one of the best platformers ever made, but it redefined what Mario is and became the baseline in the process. Not only are the basic gameplay mechanics refined and improved upon, but the power-ups, the level select screen, the Koopa Kids, secret stages, bonus stages, scrolling stages, even the music all became mainstays all the way up to Super Mario 3D World. Seriously, almost nothing has changed since, and with good reason. They got the formula right, and there's really no room for improvement. I mean, seriously, can you name anything wrong with this game? Mario 3 holds up as much today as it did then. It's hard to explain why it's so good, and you'll probably get a ton of answers, but for me, it's variety. Every level, every power-up, every world feels so different from the last that the levels never feel tired or repetitive. There's so much difference in every step of this game that even levels with the same themes still feel refreshing. And that's where many games get this wrong. Look at a series like Mega Man. I love Mega Man. It's fun, it's fast-paced, but by the time you get to the 4th or 5th entry, there's not really any noticeable growth. The levels still feel the same, powers all feel like palette swap versions of the last game. Really, it just stagnated. Even with Mega Man X, there's very little improvement throughout the entire series. And this is true of a lot of franchises. A sequel that comes close to the original is great, but there should always be an aspiration to be better. And that's what Mario 3 was. After the faltering of the lost levels, Nintendo took Super Mario Bros., made it the next game's skeleton, and built upwards. And their success could not have been clearer. Super Mario Bros. 3 is on so many must-play lists and greatest games of all time that it's achieved a status almost as legendary as Ocarina of Time or Final Fantasy VII. Heck, even during Nintendo's strange peripheral era, this was the game that got new levels over 10 years later. And if that isn't a sign of the game's legacy, then I don't know what is. Super Mario Bros. 3 gets a 10 for game quality, a 10 for franchise value, a 10 for aging, and a 10 for availability, or an overall score of 100%. Now let's look at something different. Super Mario Land 1 and 2. So, originally I wrote an entire script for these games, but the truth is, there isn't much to them. While they are definitely worthwhile Mario games, even if a bit simplified, there's not a lot I can say about them without completely dragging the pace of this video. But all you need to know is, they're both good games, they're short and easy, and if they're all you have access to, they're totally worth your time. Super Mario Land gets a 7 for game quality, a 7 for franchise value, a 6 for aging, and a 10 for availability, for an overall score of 75%. And Super Mario Land 2 gets an 8 for game quality, a 9 for franchise value, a 7 for aging, and a 10 for availability, for an overall score of 85%. And now for the big one. Super Mario World. Holy crap. You guys gotta know, I spent years finding everything in this game. The sheer volume of hidden paths and secret exits in this game are ridiculous. I would go to libraries and borrow whatever gaming books they had and would just scour them for tips on finding these secrets. And then I found out the trick to them. But Ambleside aside, Super Mario World is fantastic. While it didn't have the sheer variety that Mario 3 had, it focused on strengthening the level design. No two levels feel the same even when they're constrained by the same theme. And that is how you keep a game interesting. I mean, how many times have you been playing a game, gotten to the water level, thought to yourself, this is gonna suck, because every water level in every game has been the same sucky water level, but not here. And sometimes, even now, I like to think back to the 90s and what it was like to play this game then. Oh, cool, a cave level. All right. Oh, another cave level. All right, I guess I'll just get through this again. Oh, shit. Did you guys see that? Oh. All right, next level, I guess. Oh, another ghost house. All right. I mean, I guess I'll just solve the maze and, oh, crap, Big Boo. And I can't get out of here. And the boss music's playing? Guess that means I have to fight him. And that's what was so special about Super Mario World. They didn't just build a bunch of level packs to a theme. They built a world around that theme. Sure, they might reuse certain assets now and then, but the experience never feels tedious. In fact, every level you play, you look forward to, and you can't say that about a lot of games. Honestly, almost all the praise I gave Super Mario Bros. 3 applies here. The gameplay is solid and easy to control, the visuals and music are still great, and most importantly, it's fun. This is a game that defines the 2D Mario experience, to the point where it was massive in the hacking community and even had its own level design tools long before Super Mario Maker came along. And with the recent release of the SNES Classic giving the game a nice upscale for modern TV sets, it's as relevant now as it was then. Super Mario World gets a 10 for game quality, a 10 for franchise value, a 10 for aging, and a 9 for availability, for an overall score of 98%. Awesome, awesome game. And so is the sequel. Yoshi's Island. Okay, this is gonna piss some people off, but I'm not actually counting this game. First off, Yoshi has become a separate franchise altogether, and despite the fact that it says Super Mario World 2 in the title, this game technically isn't a Mario game, so it would be a pretty bad game to get somebody into Mario. But just to reassure those of you concerned about this, I love Yoshi's Island, it's fantastic, and it's absolutely worth your time. And maybe we'll talk about it later. Now, back to Mario. New Super Mario Bros. So, yeah, all that praise I gave Super Mario Bros. 3 and Super Mario World, fun tip. If the title starts with new, you can pretty much throw all of that out. This is what I call a time-relevant game. For those of us who had been playing Mario since the Super Nintendo, it had been about 15 years since we last touched a 2D Mario game, so the thirst was there. This game existed to satisfy a craving we desperately wanted filled, and for the most part, it worked. But by comparison to other Marios, the series only ends up decent. The level design is kind of subpar and most closely resembles the original Super Mario Bros. You do get some new elements introduced each world, and they are switched up in new ways as you progress, but it feels like you're playing one really long world rather than seeing different interpretations of a theme. And this is a personal gripe, but I absolutely hate the 3D art style of the new series. Although in replaying it, I find this game actually used a lot of 2D sprite art, and honestly, those look awesome. Keep your 2D games in 2D art. Ask a Street Fighter fan, they'll tell you. And maybe it's just me, but games like Kirby, Metroid, and of course Super Mario all seem really bland when compared to their pixelated counterparts. There's something lost in the jump to 3D with these games, and I think it's a sense of style and artistic sensibility. I'm not one to harp on a game's graphics, but given what Nintendo's done with the other fully 3D games, I think a little more style wouldn't be a bad thing. That said, much as I've complained about it, it is still kind of fun, and if you're craving more 2D Mario, this will satisfy you. But in my opinion, it's forgettable. New Super Mario Bros. Gets an 8 for game quality, a 9 for franchise value, an 8 for aging, and an 8 for availability, for an overall score of 83%. But now let's look at one I like. Super Mario Galaxy. Where sunshine faltered, Galaxy shine. I know, that's a freaking terrible joke, but it's true. And while it was everything fans have been asking for since 64, it's important to understand the time period this game came out in. You see, back in 2007, the Wii was this fresh, new console whose success caught many by surprise. Not only did the Wii appeal to Nintendo fans and gamers, but also parents, the elderly, and it found a bizarre place in the home as a novelty toy to use during family gatherings. And as a result, the system ended up with a lot of shovelware games and shoehorned motion controls. Look at The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess, a game that many people love, and with good reason. But the motion controls felt like an afterthought, and, well, that's because they were. And that's what a lot of Wii games ended up feeling like. Not like unique games that use this remarkable new control scheme, but games that just shove motion controls on top and try to get some of those Wii dollars. Even some of Nintendo's own outings kind of missed the mark on this and made things just a little bit worse. So unfortunately, the bar was set kind of low. And then, Galaxy. For the first time on the Wii, a game that perfectly blended the Wiimote and nunchuck seamlessly into the gameplay. No abundant shaking, no needlessly pointing at everything. Just simple controller gameplay with a couple motion moves integrated where needed. And it worked beautifully. It still had a few issues with the camera and some slippery movements when trying to sharply turn, especially when you're changing gravity. But overall, it was a fantastic experience. I won't go into too much detail, but the biggest point this game was marketed on was the new gravity system integrated around the planets, which I don't even know how to really describe it. But the biggest positive is how great the flow of the game is. Unlike 64 and Sunshine, you never had to stop and adjust the camera so you could see what you needed to see. The automatic camera could take care of itself. And the gameplay all feels so precise and responsive, it's just satisfying. And that is all that needs to be said about Galaxy. Except... Okay, so there's one big flaw to both Galaxy games, and while it may not bother everyone, it bothers me. This is a very fast time-lapse of Super Mario 64 versus Super Mario Galaxy, and I want you to pay close attention to the star count. See what I mean? The pacing in Galaxy is much slower than 64, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It mostly just comes down to preference. And I will fully concede that as Galaxy continues, the pace does pick up, and it's more or less consistent from start to end. If anything, my only major gripe is with this ball balancing minigame, which is only difficult because of how difficult it is to use the Wiimote effectively. I could go on an entire rant about how you would never make a full game with this kind of control and call it good, so why would you put it into your otherwise great game, but I'll spare you that pedantry for now. But until then, here's hoping we get a nice HD remaster on the Switch. Super Mario Galaxy gets a 10 for game quality, a 10 for franchise value, a 9 for aging, and an 8 for availability, for an overall score of 93%. And while we're at it, let's just take care of Galaxy 2. Super Mario Galaxy 2. Personally, I think this game is overrated. I know I'm gonna get a lot of flack for that, but whenever I sit and play this game, I can't help but notice how slow the pacing is. I still enjoy it, but I do feel it makes more obvious the flaws of Galaxy. But I know a lot of people disagree with me and feel this is the superior game, and I can totally see why. It's pretty cool having Yoshi again, there's a lot more 2D and 3D segments, and it definitely feels like a more gameplay-focused experience. I just feel like it can be kinda slow and a lot more frustrating than Galaxy was. But I still played it all the way through, so it can't be that bad. I know I've said this a few times now, but again, there's not much more I can say about this game that I didn't already say about the original Galaxy. It's really just more of that, to the point where if you look at the disc, if you happen to be a homebrew user, it's actually called Super Mario Galaxy More. So, if you loved Galaxy, you'll love Galaxy 2. It's very much worthy of your time. Galaxy 2 gets a 9 for quality, a 10 for franchise value, a 9 for aging, and an 8 for availability, for an overall score of 90%. Let's continue, shall we? New Super Mario Bros. Wii. When this game was announced, I was excited. I don't know how many of you grew up with a sibling, but if you did, you knew the struggle of trying to find a two-player game, much less finding one with co-op. Heck, I even remember talking about how cool it'd be to have a co-op Mario game back in the 90s. Of course, I had no concept of good game design back then, and sadly what Nintendo was offering only worked great in theory. You see, the biggest problem with multiplayer co-op isn't the enemy, but the other players, especially if your character takes up tangible space that you can't occupy. More often than not, you're going to be responsible for other players dying, whether it be through a mistimed jump, crowding, or just scrolling the screen too fast for another player. And that's the biggest flaw with this kind of multiplayer. It grinds momentum to a screeching halt when you can't progress at the same rate, and it's almost guaranteed that you won't. Thankfully, the game is pretty forgiving about that, given the sheer volume of lives you'll collect, but then we have the issue of, where's the challenge? Essentially, it's a game that's best played alone if you really want to enjoy it. There's not much I could say about it that I didn't already say about the original New Super Mario Bros. The mechanics are basically unchanged, and aside from a couple new power-ups, there's not really much new here. If you're looking for something chaotic and fun to play with some friends, and Mario Kart is just too much for your relationship to handle anymore, then by all means, give this a try. New Super Mario Bros. Wii gets an 8 for quality, a 7 for franchise value, an 8 for aging, and a 7 for availability, for an overall score of 75%. Co-op is kind of fun if you don't take it seriously, but this next game is even better. Super Mario 3D Land. The beautiful part about Super Mario 3D Land is how it perfectly blends the best elements of 2D and 3D Mario to create an original, yet familiar experience. Nintendo took the level-based gameplay and power-ups of 2D Mario and the free-roaming worlds and new abilities of 3D Mario and created a platforming masterpiece. And unlike the other 3D plus 2D combinations, we didn't end up with a game that lacks style or appealing visuals. Instead, everything is colorful and bright, and is actually surprisingly reminiscent of Super Mario Bros. 3, which is always a good thing. And even in the darkest stages, everything is contrasted by these bright objects and even Mario himself. And this gives the entire game this sense of wonder and, for lack of a better term, good feelings. The kind we used to get back in the NES days when games could be about literally anything. In fact, the music features several remix tracks from Mario 3, so it seems as though this was tonally what Nintendo was going for. And most importantly, it's still super fun to play. The levels range from quick and easy to ungodly difficult, and there's so much to be seen here. I'll admit it, when I first played it, the first two worlds didn't really stick out as anything remarkably special in my mind. But around the time I hit World 3, I saw this game for how fantastic it really is. I have nothing bad to say about 3D Land. It's a return to the obstacle course style gameplay of the past, and it is consistently fantastic at everything it does. And because of that, it's a must-play. Super Mario 3D Land gets a 10 for quality, a 10 for franchise value, a 10 for aging, and a 10 for availability, for an overall score of 100%. And now let's jump back into the minefield. New Super Mario Bros. 2. Oh boy, okay, so we can speed through this one because it's a waste of your time. The level design is boring and unremarkable, there's nothing new in terms of power-ups, and the gameplay is identical to the other games in the series. Play it if you're hard up for more New Super Mario Bros., but otherwise, just save your money. New Super Mario Bros. 2 gets a 6 for quality, a 6 for franchise value, an 8 for aging, and a 10 for availability, for an overall score of 75%. This is the problem with mediocre games. You can rant about a bad game, but a mediocre game gives you nothing to discuss. Thankfully, they eventually did figure out how to do the new series. New Super Mario Bros. U. So, after 3 titles in the New Super Mario Bros. Franchise, you'd think I'd have run out of things to say about them. And you're right. Fact is, while this is far and away the best game in the new series, it still suffers from the same shortcomings in multiplayer and occasional lackluster level design. It's definitely an improvement. The visuals and backgrounds are a lot more pleasing, and they seem to have stylized the game a lot more than in previous entries, but overall, it's just more of the same. If you like the new games, or you just want to experience one of them, I would have to recommend U, though it being on the Wii U exclusively does present a bit of a challenge. But if you can play it, by all means do. New Super Mario Bros. U gets an 8 for game quality, an 8 for franchise value, a 9 for aging, and an 8 for availability, for an overall score of 83%. Speaking of the Wii U, Mario does have one more entry on this system. Super Mario 3D World. So, when we discussed 3D Land, we brought up the fact that it was an amalgamation of the classic 2D games and the modern 3D free-roaming games to create an original, yet still thematically similar Mario game. And this trend continued, but Nintendo threw even more games into the pot, specifically adding Super Mario Bros. 2 and the 4 playable characters of 2 with their abilities intact, and adding the multiplayer aspect from New Super Mario Bros. Now, you might understandably think that after how much I complained about multiplayer in the new series, that it'd be just as much a problem here. But it's not. For the simple reason that you now have a full 3D plane to interact with that enables you to bump into each other significantly less. You'll still do it from time to time, and there's a few jumps that can be difficult with another player involved, but overall it happens a lot less. And most importantly, it's actually fun. Even the minigames involving Captain Toad are really fun, so much so that Nintendo felt justified in making it its own game. And perhaps one of the best parts is, it's long. There's so many levels in this game, and none of them feel like repeats. If I have anything to criticize the 3D series on, it would have to be the boss battles with Bowser, just because none of them ever feel like actual boss fights, and that is sorely missed. But what they do isn't bad by any means, and if you're a Wii U owner, you owe it to yourself to give it a try. Super Mario 3D World gets a 10 for game quality, a 10 for franchise value, a 10 for aging, and, okay, this is the sucky part about the scale I've made. Because if the video was made a year ago, it'd get a perfect score. But because the Wii U is now out of production and the Nintendo Switch is out, I sadly can't score this game as high as I want to. So Super Mario 3D World gets an 8 for availability, for an overall score of 95%. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our finale. Super Mario Odyssey. When I originally wrote this video back around late September, I intended to have this video out before Odyssey launched and make it sort of a companion piece to the game. But one thing led to another, and I decided to include Odyssey, and oh my god, I am so glad I did. There is so much to say about this game, and it comes back to everything I've been saying throughout this video. Remember when I said the Super Mario Bros. 3 was the go-to game if you wanted to see everything Mario was about? Well, forget that, because Odyssey has to take that position. This is a celebration of everything that Mario is, was, and will continue to be, and a reflection of everything that Nintendo's learned from generations of game design. And not just with Mario, but other series like Kirby, Zelda, and even some obvious influence from other studios they've worked with. Most notably Rareware, whose influence from Banjo-Kazooie can be felt all over this game. As far as gameplay goes, it is flawless. At no point did I encounter any frustrating scenarios, camera issues, or intrusive motion controls. Everything just flows naturally. Cappy creates a completely new dynamic for interacting with the world, and blends seamlessly with the platforming mechanics that have been established since Mario 64. And that's the key difference between a mechanic like Cappy versus a mechanic like the Flood. While the Flood felt forced onto you in many situations, the Cap mechanics never force you to stop and change your pace. And at no point is anything wasted. From beginning to end, there's so much content that no matter where you go, you're going to be rewarded. The interesting part is that, despite how many moons are in every stage, it never feels overwhelming. This could easily have been too much for the player or demean the value of the moons, but because everything in the game feels earned and the moons aren't required in excessive capacities, the balance of value for collectibles is maintained. And the look and feel of everything is so stylized from world to world, it never feels like you're exploring the same place twice. And, okay, I'm about to flip out. This is a spoiler, so pause and go to this time to skip this. The post-game is incredible. As soon as you beat the game, you're taken back to the Mushroom Kingdom, but not just any Mushroom Kingdom, but a complete rebuild of Mario 64's Mushroom Kingdom, complete with Peach's castle, picture frames, power stars, and the coup de grace, the polygonal Mario model from Mario 64. I'm just gonna spew rainbows for a minute, but this is the kind of appreciation for fans that hasn't been seen since Pokemon Gold and Silver let you go back to Kanto. It's the kind of respect for their classic works that you get from a seasoned musician who still puts all their heart and soul into playing a 20-year-old song, and it still makes you feel the way it did back then. And for me, it made me realize how important Mario 64 is to my childhood, and that Odyssey is soon going to be a similar memory. Odyssey is a love letter to everything Mario. From beginning to end, it's filled with references, subtle and obvious, to every game we discussed on this list, and shows how meaningful and influential every game was. Some may be better than others, and everyone has a preference, but we can all agree that no series and no character in gaming is as iconic or has nearly the legacy that Mario does. Odyssey gets a 10 for game quality, a 10 for franchise value, a 10 for aging, and a 10 for availability, for an overall score of 100%. Whew, okay, so that's it. I just want to say I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm going to be doing The Legend of Zelda next, so I'd love to know what you guys think, so if you have any thoughts, please let me know in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching.